Political observers around the country give Brandon Presley credit for giving a Republican a run for his money in a deep red state. The Democrat has been mayor of the small town of Nettleton. He's been public service commissioner for Mississippi's Northern District. But does Presley have what it takes to become Mississippi's next governor? We asked him last Friday.
Well, I think that, number one, my background makes me a lot more relatable to the average Mississippian than Tate Reeves' background does. My daddy was murdered the first day I was in the 3rd grade. My mama was a single parent. We struggled growing up when sometimes our electricity would be cut off, our water would be cut off, and sometimes both the electricity and the water were cut off at the same time. I understand the struggles of working people who are out just doing the best they can for their family, for their kids, to pay the bills. And I think that brings me a unique perspective that, quite frankly, Tate Reeves doesn't have.
How do you plan to stimulate economic development in areas that have historically been underfunded and overlooked?
Well, the Mississippi Delta is an area that is a good example that has been overlooked and underinvested in, and the city of Jackson, honestly. I feel like we've got to have direct investment, and there needs to be cooperation between state government and local entities. My background as a mayor really gives me a unique perspective on that, because if we don't build up infrastructure in some of these areas, we're never going to see economic growth. You've got counties in the Mississippi Delta that don't have a 4-lane highway. How in the world do we expect those counties to ever grow and to have economic development if they don't have the infrastructure that's in place? Another part of economic growth to me is the 16,000 jobs that we can create by expanding Medicaid in Mississippi. Not only getting health care to 230,000 working people, but creating 16,000 good health care jobs that have great upward mobility and allow people to have a great career.
When you talk about the infrastructure in the state and the cities, how do you plan to get those relationships, to improve those relationships where there's been some strain between state and local government?
Yeah, there's been such a strain, and a lot of it's because the governor is so arrogant when he deals with local officials. I believe in personal relationships. I think that you've got to sit down across the table and be results oriented. Some of the best things I've been able to get done in my public career has been working with Republicans in the state legislature to find that sweet spot in government where we're able to work together, where we're able to find solutions, not worrying about whether it's a Democratic issue or a Republican issue, but really finding the common ground. And I think that's very important to strike that tone and to strike that tenor as governor, that you want to get things done. I don't care about whether it's a Republican idea or a Democratic idea. Let's look at what the results are for the people of Mississippi, or the results are for the problem that we're trying to fix.
Let's talk a little bit about taxes. You have proposed eliminating the state's tax on groceries and cutting car tag fees in half. These taxes contribute significantly to state revenue. How do you plan to compensate the loss of revenue without affecting essential public services?
Yeah, we can cut these taxes now with the revenue that the state has. The truth is, when we're talking about trying to find dollars for tax cuts, there's always money for pet projects like Brett Favre's $5 million volleyball court, or the $77 million total that we have seen either diverted, misappropriated, or plain out stolen in the state's largest public corruption scandal. So the dollars are there in state government. It's a matter of making the priority the people. We have the highest tax on food of any state in the United States of America. In the poorest state and the sickest state, we tax food higher than any other place in this country. That's a shame and a disgrace, and it tells you just how screwed up our tax system is, that we would tax food higher than anywhere else in this country. Our car tags in Mississippi are the 7th highest car tag cost in America, in the poorest state in America. We should take some of the budget revenue that we have now to cut car tag fees in half, and to get the sales tax on groceries, putting that money back into the economy, putting that money back in the hands of taxpayers, and giving them a tax break.
The governor wants to eliminate the income tax completely. 9 states have done so, including Florida and Tennessee. Their economies show a solid growth. Why shouldn't Mississippi follow suit?
Look, I am open to any tax cut that's available that's physically responsible. I've been a tax cutter since I was mayor of my hometown. I delivered 2 property tax cuts during my time as mayor. I believe in cutting taxes. I don't want to go from robbing Peter to pay Paul and then have to jack up taxes on people in Mississippi. Tate Reeves' tax scheme was so out of balance that he couldn't even pass it through a vastly majority a vast majority Republican House and Senate. We know that there are taxes we can get off of people right now. That's the sales tax on groceries, cutting car tag fees in half. But I don't want to stop there. I support tax cuts across the board that make sense for the state, that don't cut essential services, that don't put us into a fiscally irresponsible conundrum where you're having to then raise taxes even more. The people of Mississippi want the sales tax off of groceries. They want the car tag fees cut in half.
You've been spending a lot of time in this campaign talking about the minimum wage. The state is right now with the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. What would you like to see the minimum wage be?
Well, you know, I think that $7.25 an hour right now is too low. I would work with the legislature on a figure. The first thing that comes to mind to me is $10. But many Mississippi jobs pay more than $7.25 now. But there are jobs that pay $7.25 that are minimum wage jobs. I'd like to see that work with the legislature to arrive at a figure. And I noticed Governor Reeves yesterday said he was open to the same idea.
Are you concerned that small businesses might have to lay people off if you increase the minimum wage here in Mississippi?
Most small business jobs today pay over $7.25 an hour already in the state.
Now let's talk about Medicaid. You promised you'll pass Medicaid expansion. What will this plan look like, and how do you ensure passage here?
Well, I think that there's a majority in the House and Senate of Republicans and Democrats today that would pass Medicaid expansion. Tate Reeves is the reason we're not giving health care to 230,000 working people and saving our hospital system in the state. So they're working majorities right now to get that done. I would take action on the first day to begin that process by filing for the appropriate waivers with the federal government to begin that process, and work with the House and Senate to see what the final product is. The will to get Medicaid expansion done is there. There is no leadership at the top from the governor's office to get it done. And so I want to make sure that we make that a top priority. And it's something that we'll begin work on the minute my hand comes off the Bible.
Well, there are some Republican leaders say that we can't afford to expand Medicaid. What do you say to that?
Well, we can't afford not to expand Medicaid. I believe that we have got to take these steps in Mississippi to not only help 230,000 working people get health care and save our hospitals and create 16,000 jobs, but also to bring in $1 billion worth of revenue to Mississippi. We can't afford not to expand Medicaid in the poorest state in America.
Why is your plan to expand Medicaid better than what the governor's plan is to help rural hospitals?
Well, the governor doesn't have a plan to help 230,000 people. The shenanigans that he brought out a little over a month ago does nothing to help 230,000 working people. It does nothing to help our rural hospitals in some of our most critical care areas and our most critical care units in the state. Yes, it may benefit some of the bigger hospitals, but I also would point out that it's a $178 million tax increase on hospitals. And so I believe that the first answer to this is to expand Medicaid and to draw down that $1 billion a year that the state would get.
The governor says he wants to get more people working full-time to get access to affordable care instead of being on a tax-funded coverage. Why not go that route?
Well, I think the governor ignores the fact that there are people right now that are working at restaurants. There are people right now working at hotels. There are folks right now that are roofing houses. These are jobs that Tate Reeves thinks he's too good to take. And yet he calls these workers as if they're on welfare when they simply need access to health care. They're working every day, probably putting in more hours a day than he does, just out working. And they need access to health care as they go about it. Secondly is small businesses. Small business owners, National Democrats sometimes blame small business owners. I think National Democrats are dead wrong when they do that. Small business owners are doing the best they can. They're trying to keep their doors open. They're trying to keep people employed. And they need those workers there healthy, ready to work. And Tate Reeves simply ignores that fact.
You launched a series of campaign attack ads against Governor Reeves, tying him to the TANF scandal. Most of the arguments you've presented against suggest the governor was involved without presenting concrete evidence that the then Lieutenant Governor was involved. What direct evidence do you have that he was involved?
I think Exhibit A in the case that Tate Reeves is center to the state public corruption scandal is the fact he fired the independent investigator in this case. Once that investigator got too close to Tate Reeves' buddies, once he got too close to Tate Reeves' campaign contributors, he wakes up one day and Tate Reeves fires the independent investigator. That's Exhibit A. Then we know that his brother, Todd Reeves, was text messaging back and forth with Brett Favre, acting almost as a public relations agent during this period. And the governor himself, and John Davis, who's going to spend 34 years in the penitentiary, said that Tate Reeves himself inspired the $1.3 million that went to Tate Reeves' personal trainer. The governor has been the chief cheerleader of corruption in this state for a long, long time.
But the governor argues that he had nothing to do with anything. He has not been charged with anything. So what makes you say that he still has his hands in the cookie jar? So
I think the fact that he fired the independent investigator in the case, he's never answered as to why he did that. Why would you fire someone that is independently investigating the case? Secondly, we know again that his brother was sending text messages back and forth with Brett Favre and others related to this, and the governor, John Davis, who is now facing 34 years in the penitentiary, said that the governor inspired the payment of $1.3 million to his own personal trainer. I think those are three sets of evidence that show that he's at the center of this controversy, and that he has delayed, by firing that investigator, he has delayed 13 depositions indefinitely. Most recently, the Reeves administration agreed to keep Brett Favre's testimony in the case, his deposition in the case, confidential at first until after the election, or keep it confidential, and now to keep it confidential and not take it until after the election. They know that they're hiding the true facts in this case, and at the end of the day, I would not be surprised if we don't see more and more people ensnared in this investigation, and Tate Reeves is at the center of it.
Do you believe voters care enough about what happened with TANF and the welfare scandal that will make a difference in your campaign?
Oh, I believe that voters are mad about it. They know that $77 million was taken from jobs programs, education programs, programs that were designated for the poorest among us, and given for things like a volleyball court that Brett Favre wanted that was $5 million and $1.3 million diverted to the governor's personal trainer. Vehicles were bought, steak dinners were bought, all types of corruption were seen in that $77 million. And yes, I think voters are not only concerned about it, I think they're ticked off.
Speaking of ads, can you address the one directed at you regarding your time with the Public Service Commission? Governor Reeves contends that you knowingly broke the law by accepting money from a utility under your purview.
Well, the governor is full of lies, and his ads are full of lies. And the best evidence of that is the fact that once he was threatened with a lawsuit over that ad, he changed the entire facts of the ads. He knows that it's a lie. He's trying to deflect from his own time as being the chief cheerleader of corruption in the state, and he's just making up lies.
He says 2 people went to jail doing the same thing that you've done and you've done wrong.
He knows the facts of that case is completely different, and he knows his ads are a lie. That's the reason that once he was threatened with a lawsuit by one of the companies involved, he changed the ad immediately. He knows that he's telling lies.
Does the PSC have a right to decide what constitutes a public utility and what does not?
Well, it's clear that the companies involved in his allegations are not public utilities. That's been recognized for well over 20 years. The state law recognizes that, and he is just simply making up this to try to deflect from his own public corruption and the fact that he's been involved in the state's largest public corruption scandal.
The governor has accused you of taking a lot of outside money from national Democrats from California to New York and everywhere else, that this isn't Mississippi. How do you respond to that you're not really doing the work of Mississippians?
Oh, well, I'm from a town of 1,906 people in northeast Mississippi. I'm as Mississippian as you can get. I would point out that the governor's only candidate in this race still running his campaign funded by those who have been carted off to jail in the state's largest public corruption scandal. He still runs his campaign today on funds that he received from Zach and Nancy New that he promised to return, and he's never returned them. So we're not going to take a lesson on campaign finance ethics from a guy that still runs his campaign on dollars that were taken from people that are carted off to jail.
If you win, describe your first 90 days, and what will your first order of business be?
First order of business will be to expand Medicaid immediately. We've let other states take our money long enough, and I would work on day one to take those steps as soon as my hand comes off the Bible for us to begin the process of expanding Medicaid and file for the appropriate waivers to get that done. Secondly, I would pull the legislature into a special session within the regular session to pass ethics reform to ensure that the public corruption scandal that we've seen under Tate Reeves never happens again in the state of Mississippi. And we put some teeth in the campaign finance law to make sure we clean up a system that is infected with corruption.
A special session within the regular session, how would that work? You would just keep them over, or how would you?
Well, it puts one issue on the table, and it makes the good old boys and the good old girls in the legislature put their foot on base as to whether or not they want to clean up the corruption, the unlimited influence of lobbyists, the unlimited amounts of campaign money that can come into Mississippi. We need to clean that up, and this would put focus on that issue in a special session. We know that governors have done that in the past when a priority was to get something passed.
Regardless of who is elected, the winner will likely be working with a Republican supermajority. How will you get your signature legislation done with a supermajority?
Yeah, look, some people have come to me and said, you're going to have a supermajority Republican legislature. Aren't you worried about that? No, I look at that as an opportunity to get things done. I don't want to be a type of governor that comes in and says, my way or the highway. That's the type of governor Tate Reeves is. I want to be a governor that comes in and sits down with the House and Senate and says, how can we work out some good legislation on priorities for the people of the state of Mississippi, and to find those type of sweet spots in government where Republicans and Democrats can come together. Quite frankly, Byron, I will have a better relationship with the legislature than Tate Reeves does today.
That's Brandon Presley. We'll hear from political analyst Austin Barber and Brandon Jones after the break. It's Mississippi Insight on 12 News, your local election headquarters.